Welcome to RezX,
an Indigenous Lifestyles Show for everyone.
I'm Tyler Tootoosis.
And I'm Erin Goodpipe, and we are your co-hosts. So, thank you for joining us. This episode is dedicated to Indigenous perspectives on Canada150. So, Tyler, what is your stance on Canada150?
I don't think I agree with it. I'm not going to be one to celebrate it either.
Yeah.
Honestly, yeah. I just can't see myself doing it. Well, Canada is celebrating 150, but compared to our own history and stories, Canada is just like a fetus compared to how long we've been here.
Yeah, like this is like this little marker compared to like how long we've been here. You know, they say since time immemorial.
Right.
So it's kind of like, well, it's kind of like a slap in the face, isn't it? To like, well, what about us? Let's celebrate Indigenous 100,000 or something, right?
Yeah.
Where's our birthday?
Where is our birthday? And I want some cake.
We should have some cake at the end. But yeah, so this episode is really showcasing all the different perspectives here from an Indigenous perspective, right? And a lot of, Canadian mainstream really doesn't see that perspective, right? They're not taught it in the education system. We're only recently making moves towards that now.
Yep.
In the era of truth and reconciliation, it's finally becoming embedded in Canadian systems, institutions. So it is kind of a weird thing, isn't it?
It is kind of weird, but I think what would be really cool is to gain perspective from like different tribes throughout Canada.
Yeah, that would
be really cool.
Yeah,
no
kidding.
Because I know there's probably like different minds out there, different histories, backgrounds, and
for sure. Even within our own groups, we have various different thoughts about it.
Yeah.
On July 1st, are you going to celebrate? Are you going to go see fireworks and stuff?
I think I'm just gonna go fishing.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a good way to celebrate.
Yeah, I'm gonna go out with the land because the land's always been there.
Yeah,
Canada's
for sure.
just a little baby compared to
Little
land.
baby.
Yeah.
No, I love the fireworks though personally. I do like to go out and visit with people, and I think that's a good way of sort of thinking about Canada, right? Like in this Canada150 thing, it's like let's be aware of the history and let's do something about it. But at the same time, does that mean we should kind of crap on everybody else's celebration?
True that, yeah.
Not necessarily, right? So how do we move forward with this? We're gonna check that out on this episode. So.
And the big duck too. Did you hear that story?
No, I didn't.
How the Prime Minister bought this super huge duck for the celebration.
Oh, that's weird.
It's a big rubber
Why?
ducky. Yeah, it's like 150 grand.
Wow, crazy. I wish there was 150 grand for our communities.
I know.
Anyways, let's hear what some Indigenous people have to say. Sylvia McAdam is a founder of Idle No More, a grassroots movement that has had profound impact on Indigenous activism. She was recently here in Regina for a lecture, and RezX caught up with her to talk about Canada150.
The only way I could describe that moment, something shifted in me, was I drew a line. I completely understood that cliche that day. I drew a line right across my people's lands, and I said, I can't do it. Can't do it. There's something in Canadian law, in the colonial law, it's called acquiesce. Acquiesce means that your silence is considered consent. Look it up. Consider it your homework. Acquiesce. Acquiesce means your silence is considered consent.
My name is Sylvia McAdam, and our hereditary name, the family that I come from, our last name is Saysewiham. And I want to share just that little name, Saysewiham, means when this one walks, the earth vibrates. See, that's how beautiful our language is. Our language is connected to the lands, the waters. Our history is written out on the lands, in the pictographs and the writings and the markings on the rocks, on the walls and the caves and the mountains and the songs that connect us to the water. That's who we are as Indigenous people. We are the first peoples of these lands. I am registered as an Indian on a reserve called Whitefish Lake Reserve number 118. It's also referred to as Big River First Nation, but you also have to be aware of how we're defined in the colonial system. I've been educated in their colonial law as a lawyer, so I have an understanding of the language. You have to be careful of the terminology. So After I became aware and researching the language as much as I can possibly research it, when they say we're from Big River First Nation, it relegates us into a municipal status, which is why I never identify as Big River First Nation, because it makes it sound like we only have those little pieces of postage-sized stamps, which is misleading because our lands are all over Treaty 6, including the hunting lands that have been devastated that I continue to talk about. These treaty lands, these hunting lands are supposed to be protected, but our boreal forest is being clear-cut, and we're surpassing the Amazon in terms of the clear cutting that's happening. And that's what triggered Idle No More for me. And Idle No More began because of Bill C-45. It was one of the first bills to go through the colonial parliament. So for me, the deforestation and the taking of the trees and the way that they're taking destroys the land and the water, and which is the primary issue for me. So today, the Indian Act turns 140 years old. 140 years old. And I can't understand why people are not outraged that it's existed for that long, in complete violation of who we are as a peoples, as well as in complete violation of treaty. Well, to be absolutely clear, I am not Canadian. And I am offended when people and the media describe Indigenous people as Indigenous Canadians. We never consented to be a part of Canada. That, again, has been unilaterally imposed by Canada, making us citizens without our consent into their colonial systems. So on Canada Day, July 1st, I will be walking on the lands, the hunting lands of my people in resistance. And the hashtag is called Unsettle150. Are we Canadians? We're not. We are not Canadians. And as young people who are listening to this, I invite you to research that, why I'm saying that. We are not Canadians. We are Naytowhow. We are the Dakota people, the Nakota, the Lakota, the Dene people. We are the nations. This land is ours, and we must never forget that and never buy into the idea that we are Canadians. If we do, then we might as well just let go of the idea of being nations. Do not believe the colonial state when they tell you that we ceded and surrendered the land. We never did. The elders are accurate. They're truthful when they say we never ceded and surrendered. And you're going to be saturated into believing that we did, but we did not. And I want the young people and all Indigenous people to go out to the land and reoccupy the land. And I mean that word loosely. I mean to go back into the land and get to know the land, because our history, our songs, and everything are out there. And it's so important to identify as nations beyond the reserve boundaries, beyond the Indian Act boundaries. We are treaty peoples, we are a sovereign people, and we must stand strong on that.
James Daschuck, author of Clearing the Plains, also a professor at the University of Regina. We sent Mercedes Redman to go and have a conversation with him and to gain his perspective on Canada150.
Jim Daschuck. I'm a historian and an associate professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Health Studies here at U of R. I think with Canada150, there's a lot of smoke, but there doesn't seem to be very much fire. There's a, kind of pandering to it. There's one of the themes of Canada150 is supposed to be reconciliation, but really, I don't think we've gone very far down the path of reconciliation since Mr. Trudeau's been elected. We're spending between $500 million and $1 billion on Canada150, and there's a lot of issues that aren't being dealt with, and what we're going to do is we're going to end up having a lot of fireworks and a lot of hot dogs. I don't think really there's going to be too much substantive that's going to be done, sadly. John A. Macdonald is kind of like a lightning rod, I think. So he's, the founder of Canada, one of the longest standing prime ministers, and for Western Canada, he was the person who built the railway. Like his re-election in 1878 was based on the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway. What we don't know about him was that Macdonald, as returning prime minister in 1878, he had two jobs. He was the Superintendent General of Indian Affairs for 10 years, from 78 to 1888. So he, as such, he was the longest standing Minister of Indian Affairs in Canadian history. So he oversaw the establishment of residential schools. He oversaw the implementation of the illegal pass system. He made traditional religious practices like the Sundance illegal. Look at one aspect. You got to think of the full package, and the people who are celebrating him have to think about the darker side, and maybe the people who think of him as the colonizers should think about what his accomplishments were. And I guess anybody who does anything great is going to probably do some evil, and Macdonald undoubtedly did some evil. Another person we should probably be thinking about at this time is Nicholas Flood Davin. So Nicholas Flood Davin was an entrepreneur in early Regina. He set up I think it was the Regina Leader, which joined to become the Leader Post, and was a very renowned early citizen of the city. We've come to know Nicholas Flood Davin for is his report that was, I think, tabled in 1878 or 79, recommending the establishment of Indian residential and industrial schools. So Davin, probably under the orders of John A. Macdonald, went down to Carlisle Indian School in the United States and looked at that model and brought that back to Canada. I guess the one thing is if we celebrate Canada150 in 2017 and go to Wascana Park and see the best fireworks display ever and have some free hot dogs if they're free hot dogs, like the priorities of our leaders, of our elected officials are such that we are literally burning money in the form of fireworks, when ostensibly the theme of Canada150 is reconciliation. And we know that Canada's on its third notice with regard to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, that 165,000 kids across the country are being racially discriminated against. We know that because the Human Rights Tribunal has found that, and Canada's sort of fighting that in court. They're on their third notice, and instead they're spending between $500 million and $1 billion on a kind of a celebration of Canada. Like to me, it's kind of hypocritical, actually.
Let's take a break and hear some messages from our sponsor, the Saskatchewan Indian Gaming Authority.
My name is Callie Estoica, and I go to school at Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technologies. I'm from Thunderchild First Nation. The SIGA scholarship for me brought a lot of value. Just got inspired and motivated, and that's what the scholarship really did, was inspire me. They're investing in people, and I think SIGA truly helps communities in Saskatchewan.
Access7 Sports, bringing sports to you. For all of your local sports, tune to Access7. Visit myaccess.ca/access7 for full schedule details.
For this special episode, we have members of the Indigenous community to which we've invited here to RezX to discuss the issue of Canada150. RezX's own Chris Ross was moderator. So with that, let's meet the panel.
Welcome to a special panel on Indigenous Voices on Canada150 here on RezX. My name is Chris Ross. I'm the executive producer here at RezX, and I'm joined here by a very special panel here, a very special guest. So first, I would like to just share the mic here and just let you each introduce yourselves and let the viewers know who you are and just tell them a little bit about yourself. So first, I'll start with you, Rodger.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me. My name is Rodger Ross, and I'm a multimedia producer. Worked in the media for 36 years, I guess, and including journalism, traditional storyteller, and reside born and raised here in Regina.
I guess y'all know me. I'm Erin Goodpipe. Obviously, I'm the co-host here at RezX. So doing what we do at RezX, we get to go around in communities and also at 2 events and get to cover those and hear the stories and celebrate them through media. But as well, I'm a research assistant, formerly with the Indigenous Peoples Health Research Center, but now in a grant called Acting Out, but in a good way. So I do arts programming with Indigenous youth, mostly within the Falhouse-Capel Tribal Council area. So doing some grasswork stuff right now with environment and then translating it into arts. So I'm also a student at the First Nations University in Education, so a little bit about me.
I'm a Weste, Chungusha Gamani Magiavi, from Bellegarde. I'm from the Little Black Bear First Nation, but I grew up on Carry the Kettle, and I'm here just to talk.
Well, thank you all for coming. You know, I really appreciate giving your time here to RezX to come talk about this very important issue. And so, you know, that's what this episode is about. It's called, you know, Indigenous Voices on Canada150, because I feel it's really important to let, you know, the mainstream audience and our viewers and let people know about what our perspective is, right? Because there's a lot of pro-Canadian, very pro-celebration, you know. That's what we're seeing everywhere, from businesses to marketing, organizations. It's really coming out there right now. So really, the overall first question is, what is your overall stance on Canada150 as an Indigenous person, and what is your position on it? So Rodger, I'll start with you and we'll go around the table.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, it's a celebration, and it should be, you know, as far as the perspective of Canada. From the Indigenous perspective, it's a little different for us. I mean, obviously, you know, our people have been around, you know, from the beginning of time, according to our creation stories. And, you know, when I did my introduction, I talked about being a traditional storyteller, and those types of stories for me are more than just, you know, things that happen once a year. You know, I get out, you know, in the community to tell these stories. For us, these stories have you know, survived an incredible long time. You know, we're only finding out now what our people have known from the beginning, that our people have always been here. We didn't come from somewhere else. You know, so that puts another slant on it. You know, we're seeing a paradigm shift in the way that our stories are being told. How, you know, that we actually have a voice now. You know, we didn't hear much about the protests that happened in the 60s, where thousands of people marched on Ottawa, Indigenous people. You know, it was I think it ended up on the back pages of the newspapers in that day. You know, because Indigenous people just didn't matter. You know, but since I don't know more and other things, social media, the way that we're using social media now, you know, we're finding our voice in that regard. You know, you've got a TV program that we're all sitting here on. You know, where were these programs 20 years ago? I've been involved in media for 36. You know, it wasn't there. You know, it's here now. And I think that's why we're seeing this, you know, perspective, the Indigenous perspective. And people are asking, and I think that's a wonderful thing. You know, we need to start educating other people. We've learned so much about the Western culture, they know nothing about us.
Excellent.
You know, and it's that time.
Yeah, for sure.
And Erin?
You know, I think I'm going to take a different stance on that, because it's kind of marketed as this celebration. But to me, I think about, you know, as an Indigenous woman and having just lost my mother this year, and I think about her story and stuff, prostitution, you know, living on the streets of East Hastings, and how she got out there, how her parents got out there, dying violently, right? I just think about that, and I think about the intergenerational trauma and the genocide, the assimilation, the policies, right, that are put into place from Canada to literally rid the Indian from this land. Well, that's really kind of tough to celebrate, isn't it? And so, yeah, it's kind of like a slap in the face, and it's kind of like, okay, Canada, like, it's time to wake up. And part of me is a little offended by that, right, as an Indigenous person. And I think, you know, on a positive side, though, I get the idea of a celebration because for us as Indigenous people, we can celebrate the resiliency. We're still here, right? So what does that say to the mainstream Canadian, right? Like, it's a tough truth, especially in this day and age of like truth and reconciliation, because it's either, you know, you have to recognize that as a mainstream Canadian, you're contributing to this by not knowing and not doing anything about it. So really hope Canada150 is like a wake-up call to, you know, the broken relationship, because think about it, we're on Treaty for Land, right? And that was signed in 1874 before Confederacy was signed, right? So why don't we celebrate those things? That's what I wonder.
Absolutely.
Brad?
Well, I can't sit here and look at the past 150 years and think about all of the wrongs, all the bad, you know, because every culture, every ethnicity, every group of people, every family has trauma. All I can say about the 150 is, you know, it's a celebration, so celebrate it. Celebrate that idea of Canada, you know, like some very close people to me, some of my relatives, they see themselves as Indigenous people, like Nakota people. You know, they come from that way of life. They don't think of borders. You know, there's no borders. So that idea of colonialism, 150 years, yes, there's thousands of years of colonialism that have happened around the world, but for us to sit here, I think, and take a look, really take a look at what this is, everything in life is an opportunity. You know, you can look at it as an obstacle, you could look at it as oppressive, but everything has an opportunity. You think of that circle, you know, if that circle's broken, you join back, you're united again. So it's an opportunity to spark conversation, spark discussion. We can't rewrite history. We could write the future, though. So by taking a look at all of the opportunities that came with this oppression to create dialogue, we're now being educated, we're now having our education, we now have people that are working in the media, we have people that are catching mainstream media attention through internet. Because in one way or the other, we're all going to take a look back 150 years from now and say, let's look at these last 150 years. What did we do since then? Instead of complaining and really trying to impose Indigenous beliefs and philosophies, we should just be looking at an opportunity to change the circle around us, you know, who we associate with. So I think it's a good opportunity for us to be able to have a conversation. I'm not going to look back on 150 years and say, man, that was horrible, you know, because every culture could do that. What we can do is be like, oh, wow, you know what? Well, we learn from those mistakes and then we move on. So that's my whole take on it, you know. But if you're coming out here and you're proud to be Canadian, you're proud for the 150 years, celebrate it. I'm not gonna tell anybody to stop trying to have a good time. You know, it's like, oh man, that sucks. Oh, you're not going to do that. Somebody's all happy. Yeah, I had a 150. You know what it was for 150 years what happened to my people? We don't need to do that because that's not the Indigenous way either to bring people down, you know? We have to uplift people and make them feel comfortable around us, and I think that it's a great opportunity. So that's why, thanks for having 3 different generations of thought here, you know?
And that's really really good feedback too, because it also gives people that idea that you know we're also a welcoming country and a welcoming group of people as well as First Nations. So we're going to be right back. We're going to continue on after the break here as well too. So I'm going to cut it to Tyler here to take us to the break.
We'll get right back to the panel after our break. But first, let's hear some more Indigenous voices on what they think about Canada150.
That's it. My name's Joseph Naytowhow. I'm from Sturgeon Lake First Nation. Nihio, I'm Cree, Woodland Cree, and Plains Cree mix. And this topic about the celebration of 150 years since Confederation is, I'm a bit mixed in my feelings about it. Because it's going to happen, you know, colonization happened no matter what. It's just like our people were never really asked whether they wanted to undertake this process. They were just told that you are now part of this country, you are now part of the laws and the new policies. So at this point, I'm glad to have a choice whether I want to celebrate or not, whether I want to be part of that party, as they call it, you know, because now at least I can say no. Something that I haven't been able to say. No, I will not, you know, celebrate 150 years since Confederation. But what I'll do is I will honor those people that are Canadians who are trying to understand what Aboriginal people, First Nations, or Indigenous people went through in this country. If you're a true Canadian, you will get to know your history, and that's the first thing you need to do, you know, to understand what has happened in the last 150 years. A lot has happened. I was born about 70 years later, once the Confederation was established. So already there was that much time that this was allowed, you know, able to flourish throughout Canada. And I was just a young kid, you know, so my experience with Confederation was to, you know, experience still, you know, the policies, you know, set down by the government and the church states. And so I went through hell and back, basically, you know, for, you know, 50 or more years, probably less than that. I started healing when I was in my 30s. So that was helpful for me to understand, you know, that this happens, you know, when settlers go into a new territory and just basically force their way into that country, into the people that were living there. So they forced their way into our community, into my house, for example, and just decided to make themselves at home. And so 150 years since Confederation is not something to take like lightly. To me, if you're a good Canadian, study the history, study the past of how your ancestors treated the Indigenous people here. That, to me, is the point that I want to make about the 150. And that's important for me because it'll feel good for me that there are people out there who are willing to understand, at least, you know, give a little sacrifice like we did, you know, in this land, you know, and just to sacrifice a little bit to get to know us, how we think, how we act, you know, who we really are. A lot of them haven't stepped into that arena yet. So that's all I'm going to say about that I'm Scott now.
The mission of the Friendship Inn is to offer a compassionate hand up with a sense of friendship and belonging, and offering 2 free meals a day, 365 days a year. Costco, Safeway, Sobeys, they donate food to the Friendship Inn every day. And without those donations, we couldn't feed the 800 to 900 meals that we're serving every day. When you come to the Friendship Inn, you can expect to be treated like you are somebody. The relationship that we have with Siga is very important. They've committed to once a month coming to the Friendship Inn. And they help prepare the meal, and then they help serve the meal with a smile, and it's quite refreshing, the relationship that we have with Siga.
Welcome back. Let's get back to our panel and Chris Ross with our guests.
Okay, welcome back to the special panel here on Indigenous Voices on Canada150 here on RezX on the special episode. If you're just joining us, I'm here joined with Rodger Ross, Erin Goodpipe, and Brad Bellegarde, who all are joining us on this really interesting conversation, and I feel that we just kind of got started with the last one. So the second question really is, I really want you to kind of acknowledge us and kind of see what you've been seeing through these celebrations as well. And the question is, do you think the government is doing enough to acknowledge the history of Indigenous people when it comes to these Canada150 celebrations? And I'll start with Brad first because you finished, and go back this way. Sure. All right.
Yeah, actually, you know, I think there. I know personally, I know of a lot of individuals, Indigenous individuals that are part of Indigenous organizations that have applied for Canada150 funding in order to be able to have their events. And they've been successful in acquiring that funding. So they're doing their part by bringing that to the forefront, just like all these other smaller communities, whether it be municipal government, provincial government, or federal government organizations that are helping assist with the promotion of the materials. I think they are. I don't think it's the sole responsibility. it's not a fiduciary responsibility of the government to be able to implement Indigenous philosophies or Indigenous histories within the Canada150, because that's the beauty of our multiculturalism in this nation, because they're allowed to. But is there more that can be done? Obviously, there's going to be a lot more that can be done. But I think we've reached a point in our existence here. We've had 150 years of Canada's confederation, but we've reached a point where Indigenous people and organizations can now step up to the plate, and they can take that ball in the game here, you know, and the game of nationhood, we'll call it. On one hand, we have the Regina Redskins. No, I'm just joking. We have these opportunities, though, for us to be able to take this to the forefront and make change. Instead of talking, we can start walking, and with a little bit of assistance, it can happen. Because I go into schools like constantly. There's schools that are putting up the Treaty 4 flag. They're implementing their own curriculum. They're inviting in different Indigenous voices to be able to come and talk to the youth. And it took so long for something like this, where you cannot disregard a certain portion of Canada's history. So I think the government is providing an opportunity for people to be able to create something, whether that be a festival, a celebration, a day of activities, or to create art, you know, whatever it might be. I think there's some opportunity there, and this is just it's like the first year, you know, this is just the birth of a new era. And I think that we can see a lot more informative dialogue come up over the next few years.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I totally agree with Brad. Yeah, like I see Canada, like the government is making that step now. I think in due part because Indigenous people we're getting loud and we're unavoidable now. We're starting to, you know, in a way uprising and saying like, hello Canada, wake up, like we're here, you need to recognize this, otherwise you're gonna have some stink about it, right? Yeah, so I do see that there's a push towards this Indigenous platform of like marketing it that way, but at the same time, like for that multiculturalism, and part of me is a little bit worried that it's like a tokenism, right? Like, oh, here's Canada and we're so friendly towards the Indigenous people, so we're gonna run all these things, but actually we don't invest into, you know, their cultures, their philosophies, their way of living and stuff, right? So part of me knows that it's a two-sided kind of die here. And I think being aware of that's really important, right? Are they really investing, or is it just like this on the front cover, oh, look, here's me shaking the hand with an Indigenous person, right? Something to think about there, but I agree with you, Brad, that like it's moving forward.
I always think when I hear about technology and then the way that we're going towards like a technological revolution right now, when Black Elk talks about like we need to get back to when technology comes, that's going to be the downfall of our people, because we're going to lose everything. We're not going to speak our own mother languages. We're not going to speak the language of Mother Earth, what we were given. You know, that's our true spirit language. So it kind of makes me think about like how many kids nowadays can actually pick up an iPad and can't speak English yet because they can't even talk yet, but they know how to work an iPad. You know, and how many people are in their teens right now, they can't start a fire, they don't know which medicines to pick, they don't know how to plant a garden, they don't know how to grow food, they don't know how to hunt, things like that, you know? That's where we can start embracing our own indigeneity, our Indigenous culture and our history, by teaching our kids that, by learning ourselves, learning our own languages, and introducing yourself in your own way.
And that's what I meant by, you know, the onus is on us, right? We have to take responsibility for that. I didn't grow up knowing those stories, Brad. You know, it took me many, many years to sit down with elders, you know, through my travels that allowed me that opportunity, because it wasn't available to us in schools, right? We didn't see people like me coming to schools to do storytelling, right? We do now, you know, and that's what I mean. That shift is here now, right? And we can take advantage of that. You're working in the media now. I had a chance, right? But I didn't like it at the time. You know, I didn't feel comfortable there. Now I do, and now I'm okay with, you know, being wherever I need to be, and whenever I'm asked to go, I go, right? Because the onus is on me now to help celebrate that, to help bring that back to the forefront.
For sure. You know, you guys are bringing up some interesting points, right? Like Brad, you're talking about like, you know, our indigeneity, and it's like something that's really interesting to me is like recognizing our identity as being sort of in negotiation right now because of such a changing time. We're talking about technology, we're talking about modernism, we're talking about a different time where we're kind of getting out of colonialism now. And it's like, so what makes a person Indigenous? What makes a person Canadian? What makes someone belong to a culture? And it's like, what can we say as Indigenous people bringing forward our culture into 150? And I think that comes down to, well, what are our cores as human beings, right? And how do we, develop a country together, arm in arm, that says we're valuing respect and love and generosity and kindness, right? I think we can all agree on those. And I think, going forward, there's a way to link technology and modernity, because it's not going to stop. It's going to keep excelling, right? But how do we do that and mold that together, right? Because I think the word Indigenous means to originate from the land. And if you think about that, that means every single human on this planet, right? We all originate from the land. So knowing that, how can we come together with our state as all Indigenous people to create something that's good for our generations to come, right? That's on us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So all great feedback here as well too, but we run out of time here for this segment here, but we are going to come back and we're going to talk about some of our own celebrated Indigenous people of this country, right? And really I want you guys to think about that. So we'll be right back, and I'll just hand it over back to Tyler. All right, thank you very much.
Some great discussions. Let's get back to our panel after this break. But first, let's gain some more perspective on some Indigenous thoughts about Canada 150. We're here in Treaty 6 territory at Station 20 West, and I'm here with Randy Morin. So Randy, tell us about yourself.
Hey, thank you, Tyler. That's at the Nakumagantik, Randy Morin, Sigason, Big River First Station, Ostinia. I'm from Big River First Station. My name is Randy Morin. I'm first and foremost a Plains Cree man, very proud of it.
When it comes to this Canada's 150th birthday, what is your Indigenous perspective of it?
Yeah, it just kind of came out of nowhere, one day I was like, I woke up and, all of a sudden, Canada's 150, like, what is that? It was like, oh, it's another big hype. What is it? Oh, Canada's 150th birthday. Oh, cool. Yay. Whoa. But then I started thinking, well, how is that going to benefit me or my children or my children's children, Well, I don't think it's going to really benefit them, like, as always, like all the policies that we've had in place, So I have a lot of views on Canada 150. I think Canada in general just wants to live in this fantasy land, where they paint everything out with one brush, oh, things are great, they're trying to feel good about themselves, but they're trying to look away from the truth that's happening to Indigenous people, so yeah, those are some of the things I think about with Canada 150, I know there's a lot of money being spent, Canada's really going all out with Canada 150, here's money to Indigenous communities, do something, But yeah, I think there needs to be more that could be done, and I hope more will be done. And I guess that starts with education, educating Canadians, educating newcomers, about the history, right?
I'm here, Treaty 6 territory, with theater artist Curtis Peeteetuce. So Curtis, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Cree from the Beardies and Okamasis First Nation, but I'm based in Saskatoon as an actor, a playwright, a director, and a musician.
So how do you feel about Canada's 150th birthday, all these celebrations that are going to be going about?
Has it been 150 years already? My, the time flies, hey?
It sure has.
Actually, when you think about it, 150 years is not very long. I'm 43 years old, which makes me almost a third of Canada's age, and I think Canada still has a lot to learn, because the prehistory of Canada, this territory, Turtle Island, is thousands of years old, and we have stories, we have customs, we have our language, which speaks to all of the foundational values that has actually allowed Canada to be born. So I think we have to acknowledge that prehistory when we are thinking of Canada 150.
When I think of this 150th celebration, one of the main things that they always do is always have singers and dancers and probably a few speakers. Do you think Naytowhow people should be involved in these types of celebrations, or should we step back?
I think we should definitely be involved. If we're going to make it to Canada 200 or even Canada 300, we definitely should be thinking about things like having the Cree language as one of Canada's main languages.
Do you think Indigenous people should partake in these celebrations?
I think so. I think they should, just because we need to tell Canadians that we are still here. You know, we need to go to those white spaces that are having these celebrations. We need to go there and we need to assert our inherent rights to be there. This is our land, original land, right? So yeah, I think there's celebrations happening. Let's go make ourselves visible. Let's go make our culture visible. Let's make our languages visible. You know, because sometimes people think we're long gone. We're in the past. You know, especially newcomers, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to go there. We need to let them know that we are here, we're proud, and we'll always be here.
Thank you, Randy Morin. It was really a good perspective that you gave us, and I really appreciate the message that you gave to us and the people. And thank you.
Thank you, Tyler.
Yep.
Don't give up. You know, be proud, be Indigenous.
I think I really look forward to growing old and seeing things progress to an amazing state from what they are now.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
I'd like to thank you, Curtis. It's been swell hanging with you and good to know you.
Thank you, man.
Access7, bringing Saskatchewan to you. For more details, visit myaccess.ca/watchlocal.
In Saskatoon, we've been providing free literacy support and services to our community. Parents are a child's first teacher. Their home is the first classroom. Our community is their first school. People walk through our doors for two main reasons. One is they want to improve their literacy skills, or the other reason they come through is to help someone. SIGA's a part of our organization. They've embraced our mission and our vision. We salute their commitment to learning.
Continuing on with our panel, let's check back in with Chris Ross and our guests.
Thank you, Tyler. So if you guys are just joining us, we are doing a special panel here called Indigenous Voices on Canada150, and I'm here joined with Rodger, Ross, Erin Goodpipe, and Brad Bellegarde here, who've been discussing this topic throughout the entire episode here. It's been really great talking with you guys so far. But the question I had is, you know, throughout this episode, we're talking a lot about the celebrated Canadians, right? You know, and that a lot of what you're seeing coming out from government marketing and things like that, right, and businesses, and just kind of like the overall marketing of this celebration, and a lot of it is on these Canadians, John A. Macdonald and such, you know, first Prime Minister and so on and so forth, right? But what I wanted us to focus on is our own Indigenous heroes, people that we should be celebrating, that had very much to do with, you know, founding this country, you know, before it was even a country, who were here before, right? So I want to leave it up to you if there's somebody that you can educate non-Indigenous people or non-Indigenous viewers watching about an Indigenous hero, somebody that you're very proud of.
It's a really tough question because I look at prior, and we talked about treaties earlier. My great-grandfather signed Treaty 4, and I always write the word sick when I'm writing this down because he didn't really sign anything. He touched a pen and somebody put an X for him. His name was Canada150, he who walks on four claws. And you know, I've always had that in my mind since I found out more about my own family and that history. You know, so I look at what he did at that time and coming to the table to try and, you know, find a life for his people, you know, that were being wiped out and decimated. I look at people like Chief Dan George and the presence that he had. I look at people like Jim Sinclair and Harry the Dog Daniels and what they did politically to bring us to the table. You know, the Constitution talks in the 80s. I happen to be a part of that too, and I look at that history and how many people don't know that history. I think about the warriors that stood up against the Canadian military at Oka. You know, how many heroes were there that day? You know, Elenisa Bomsawin, a filmmaker who was there and shot it. You know, those types of things for me, how do I choose one? You know, when you know your own history, you understand that there's more than one hero out there.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
You know, we have a lot of them. So for me, those are some of the people that stand out for me.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I like how you brought up, you know, the people who are in the back, right? Because for us, our worldview is like, it takes a community to build something, but more oftentimes you see the chiefs and stuff that are celebrated. So I think from like a woman perspective even, right, like the men all would come back to the camps, right? And they would for sure consult the women, but you never hear that story, right? So how do we recognize, you know, our heroes in that? For me though, I'm a Dakota woman, Wia, and for sure, the celebrated 3 chiefs that we hear of resilience is Tatanki Tonka and Tashunka Wheatgo, Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull and Red Cloud, of course. And we're talking about Canada150 before it was even a country, right? My people are here now, but before before the medicine line was there, you know, there were no borders. Our territories were quite large, right? And lots of us were people who migrated around, right? So. Those people, though, are in an interesting time because this is, you know, when these policies are starting to come up and there's friction, and now there's a new way of life that's being introduced, and they're being forced into it and trying to negotiate. Well, what is my identity, right? And I know that is such a tough thing to have to go through, right? To have to decide, okay, how do I move forward with my values, my culture, but also, you know, as chiefs, like as leaders, how do I serve my people and make sure they're not dying, right? So I think of that great moral dilemma that they had, and I'm so thankful today for the things that we have because of, you know, some of the decisions that they made, because I know it was really difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you guys for sharing that. That's cool, you know, different perspectives. You know, like, for me, like, what's a hero? Take a look at honestly, man, I have cousins that grew up with their dads being there, and now they're raising their kids themselves and stuff. Those guys are the heroes, you know. Those kids who grew up with trauma, with troubled lives, without one parent there, but they're doing their best to raise their family in a good way. Like those are the stories that people need to know. Not every single Indigenous person who has a job gets up every day and works, you know, like goes and does their work and goes home, pays their bills, puts food on the table. They're heroes, you know. You know, not every Indigenous person, First Nation person is waiting for a handout. Not every Indigenous person is going to sit there and be an advocate or an activist, you know. That's like the people that are just getting by,
it's the regular,
just doing their stuff. Like I look at honestly, I look at my parents and I'm like, man, they're together after 45 years. Like, that's a hero right there. Those are heroes, you know? It's like, we see like divorce and stuff happening so often, and broken families, and then there's
But I bet you there's more families together.
Exactly, because they work on that stuff. But those stories fall through the cracks. It's like, one bad thing happened on one reserve, that whole reserve is stereotyped as something, you know? If 25 good things come out of a reserve, everybody still looks at that one bad thing. So honestly, I take this time to say, if you're sitting at home, if you're being good to your wife, you're treating your parents with respect, you're raising your children, you're teaching them how to live and survive, and you're putting food on your table, you're out there, you don't have a job right now, you're trying to get a job because you're working your butt off. You guys are all heroes to me. You know, those are the people that are going to keep our people strong. For sure. And then 150 years from now, we won't have to worry about looking back at those stereotypes, because you know what? They'll be a part of history again, because we're looking at people like, oh, wow, well, we won't have to worry about, oh, he came from privilege, because you know what? It's a privilege to wake up and live every morning. You have to give thanks in the morning, give thanks at night. Otherwise, you're just going to be a walking ghost.
That's right, man.
You know, so we've got to recognize those people that are doing what they can to raise their family right and put food on their table. Like your story about growing your hair out to show. Like, lead by example, you know? That's hero. You're a hero for doing that, you know?
And your sons will look at you that way. I think it's a great point. How many elders, you know, did we see who managed to hang on to those teachings, you know, through all the oppression that was happening to our people? You know, how the ceremony survived. You know, how the language for some tribes were able to maintain that language. I wasn't raised with it for sure, you know, but I'm learning more of it. And I think it's due to them as well, you know. So saying, you know, what Brad's saying, understanding with that concept of, you know, that's what heroes were and what they are today. Those people sacrificed a lot to make sure that we had that available to us. You know, our future generations are going to look at this present generation and say they worked their butt off for this, you know, and we need to step it up one more. You know, and I think that's the direction that we need to start taking.
Yeah, for sure. What a great privilege that we have today, hey?
Absolutely.
Because of those people.
So, really great feedback. I really want to thank you all, and some of the messages that we're hearing today, it's really it starts with all of us as Indigenous people to move forward to the next 150 years, so that we don't have to look back at the 150 years of, as, some people are today, right? Of a lot of the atrocities that happened, but we do have an opportunity here to move things forward. That's I think, the underlying message, because we seriously do, right? Moving forward and talking about that, right? While still acknowledging the history, and I think that's important just as well. But young Indigenous people, just regular people waking up every morning, just working hard, right? And that's really is becoming the social norm with Indigenous people. It seriously is, right? All those stereotypes are slowly disappearing as we're starting to see, right? I see it with young people today. It's phenomenal, So, yeah. So, with that, I want to thank you, Brad, Erin, and Rodger, for coming by. I really want to thank you. We're going to put this together as a podcast, if you guys don't mind. I'm going to put it on RezXmag.com when I can get to that. So, but I want to thank you for joining us on the season finale on Indigenous Voices on Canada150.
RezX's own Mercedes Redman went to go see the display of We Are All Treaty People at the Saskatchewan Royal Museum, and to also inquire, where does treaties fit in with Canada150?
My name is Evelyn Siegfried, and I am the curator of the Aboriginal Studies program at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum. The gallery is a thematic gallery which has 4 major areas, and it begins with the world view and the Wasakechak story of how the earth began. So it presents, what the gallery presents is an Indigenous view of how the world began, rather than the science-based view that most people know today in Canada. It begins with that origin story of Wasakechak, and then it moves into examples of pictographs that are found on rock walls, so rock paintings that are found throughout mostly the northern part of Saskatchewan. And then the gallery moves into a teepee diorama that basically gives a snapshot of time, 1754, and an Assiniboine Cree camp where people are putting together a camp. Somebody's gone hunting, and the ladies are putting a teepee up, and it's a real bison hide teepee. Then it moves into an area called St. Victor's Petroglyph, which is an actual spot on the Saskatchewan landscape in southern Saskatchewan. Then it moves from the material culture, you go into what's called the seasonal round, and the seasonal round basically shows different kinds of hunting, how hunting changed through time. The gallery finishes off with the trade period, showing some examples of in diorama form of trading events that were taking place on the landscape. Confederation happened in 1867, and the numbered treaties of Canada began in 1871, and there were 11 treaties that were signed. So the treaties the treaty-making period was an extremely important period in Canada, in what was eventually to become Canada. The treaties, many of the Indigenous peoples of Canada recognized that something was happening, change was happening. Strangers were flooding into the landscape, and they couldn't stop it. They couldn't stop it. The Pasqua pictograph is related to Treaty 4 and the Treaty 4 negotiations. Chief Pasqua was one of the chiefs that was present at the signing of Treaty 4 on September the 15th, 1874. It appears to be an exploration of the negotiations themselves, how they took place, what Chief Pasqua saw happen, and that's on the left side, and then on the right side, there appears to be a totaling of things that were promised in the treaties. So you can see drawings of a suit, for example, a treaty suit for the chief and the headman, examples of saws, tea, tobacco. What the items are exactly, some are a little hard to decipher, and that is something that elders are going to interpret. But it is about, it does appear to be about some dissatisfaction. Now, the oral history is that the document was supposed, Chief Pasqua had expectations that he would pass this on to Mr. Barnaby, and Mr. Barnaby would take it to Queen Victoria. And that never happened. Well, one of the important things I think that we have to think about as Canadians, and I'm part Indigenous myself, so I feel strongly about it all as well, is that we have to think about that treaty-making period, that post-Confederation period, what it meant to the Indigenous peoples of Canada, the expectations that they had from the treaty-making process, and the fact that they weren't happy very early on. I didn't think of the fact that two parties had negotiated the treaties. So there were two parties that signed and were part of that whole process. It's about everybody. It's not just about Indigenous people alone saying, you know, things haven't gone well for us. It's about the rest of Canada acknowledging what happened, looking back, reflecting. Maybe we need some good self-reflection about what happened, and that's what we need to think about to move forward.
Edgar Dewdney was the government's Indian commissioner in the late 1800s. He played a major role in establishing Canada's reserve system. At the time, Indian people were starving because the government had killed off all the buffalo. So he was in charge of rations, of feeding them, but instead he starved them, putting them on reserves and forcing them to farm. Here's a quote he reported: "As little rations as possible are to be given to able-bodied Indians who do not work." August 1882. So why does Regina still have a street named after him, named after one of the biggest colonizers and oppressors on Indian people? With Canada's 150th birthday coming up, the legacy of Indian Commissioner Edgar Dewdney is nothing and nobody to celebrate.
Well, another great episode.
Another great season.
Oh man, it was a good one, wasn't it?
I had so much fun.
Yeah, no kidding. It was your first time. What was the experience like for you, Tyler?
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's totally been a lifelong learning experience, I think.
Yeah, well, you were such a perfect fit, especially like with reporting and great Indigenous laughs.
Stop it, you. You're getting me sigh.
Oh, we're saying he should be the face for some commercials. Especially the Sega one. We're getting very good at the Sega one.
Oh, I love Sega.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Do you have any summer plans?
Probably go down to the States, I think. I wanted to do that for a while. Got some family down there, go visit for a bit.
Yeah, that sounds sweet, yeah.
Yeah, go sightseeing. I usually like checking out Devil's Tower in Wyoming. It's a pretty cool place.
Hey, yeah, I've been there. It's a pretty cool spot. Pretty cool spot, yeah. I'm looking forward to, traveling around.
Will you be busy too?
Well, sometimes you have plans and then you have ideas. Sometimes plans don't go through, but ideas are forever.
I feel like I just want to stay home.
I know. Doesn't that sound like a really great summer? Like doing nothing. You're getting old when?
I know. My goodness. I feel old.
Yeah, you are. Did you just celebrate your birthday?
Yeah. I'm 36 years old now.
Ooh, he's getting up there, guys.
36 revelations around the sun.
Revelations? Many moons ago. He's an elder in training.
Is it revelations or revolutions?
I don't know.
I don't know.
You're talking about The Matrix?
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. Man, cool stuff. Cool stuff. It was a really great season with RezX.
Yep.
And I know we're really looking forward to next season. We want to thank our sponsor, the Saskatchewan Indian Gaming Authority, for this wonderful season.
And Shaw and Access.
We'll also want to thank you guys for tuning in. And we'll see you next season.